Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. It's good to see all of you. This morning we're carrying on in our series that is called Faith for This Moment. What does it mean to be a faithful follower of Jesus in our current cultural moment? What does it mean to live as a follower of Jesus today? Over the past weeks, we've looked at the theme of exile and made the comparison between the Israelites living in exile in ancient Babylon and those similarities that there might be to us today. We've kind of had a little bit as a theme verse, the verse in Psalm 137, verse 4. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a pagan land? And that was the verse, the psalm that the Israelites were wrestling with as they found themselves in exile. And they were in a land that didn't follow their beliefs and their values, and they were trying to figure out, how do we live out our faith in this foreign land? And it's a little bit of that similarity that we have today, is how do we live out our faith in a world that has really turned from the typical, traditional values and beliefs that we may espouse. And so that challenge of how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a pagan land ring true to us today. And over the coming weeks, we will look at 6 practices for living faithfully in our modern day Babylon. We don't use these practices in order to make grace happen, in order to force the hand of God into granting us favors, or in order for him to look favorably upon us. Rather, they are practices that will hopefully turn us towards what God is doing in the world. Practices that will display grace to those around us. Practices that will be key for us if we are truly to seek the peace and prosperity of our city, as Jeremiah challenged the Israelites in their time of exile. We want to consider what it would look like if we lived out these practices in our daily lives. And we want to consider what it would look like if we were to live out these practices as a community here at Bethel. So these practices, we're looking at number 1 today. They're in no particular order. They are 6 practices that we want to look at. Rael mentioned that this morning we're going to be looking at the practice of generosity. Now, I am no expert on generosity. I struggle with that as much as likely many of us. I have had the privilege of experiencing it. Through my role at Youth Unlimited, I've seen incredible acts of generosity through financial giving, through volunteering and giving of time, through people using of their gifts, through people giving sacrificially. I also had the privilege of growing up in a family where I had examples of parents who were very generous, who gave and were always generous, always welcoming, always willing to have somebody else in the house if necessary. You can understand, though, if you knew my older brothers and sisters, why it would be important for them to have the gift of generosity. Because it really wasn't until I came along that things settled down and things were a little bit more normal. But I am not an expert in this. But I do want to share a few thoughts. And then you may wonder why these chairs are here. I'm going to invite 3 people up to come and share some of their thoughts, not their shots, their thoughts on the topic. Ancient Babylon was ruled by wealth and abundance. The bumper stickers on their chariots may very well have looked like this. Oops, the wrong way. The chariots roaming around Babylon would all have had that kind of mentality. A desire for questing for more. And this is very similar to maybe bumper stickers that you've seen around our city. There's similar values we see reflected in our modern day Babylon. We are on a constant quest for stuff. We're bombarded by images of things we don't even know we needed, but now we can't live without. Money is powerful, and God knows that it can quickly creep into our lives. and we can become consumed with the pursuit of things, frantically trying to acquire more. But generosity flies in the face of that mindset. God wanted his people to live free from the fear of scarcity and trust in his abundant provision. But he also knew the temptation of wealth that his people would face as they entered into a wealthy land. And so back in Deuteronomy, he warns them of these dangers. Deuteronomy 8, "For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land of flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and hills. It is a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees, and pomegranates, of olive oil and honey. It is a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. It is a land where iron is common as stone, and copper is abundant in the hills. When you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I am giving you today. For when you have become full of and prosperous, and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large, and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget the Lord your God, who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt." The danger of wealth and comfort is real, and God warns his people to be careful. Don't become proud. Don't forget. Shiny things have deceptive powers. Walter Brueggemann says in his book, The Gospel of Hope, "When you are full, do not forget. Being full causes amnesia. Being comfortable causes indifference. Being secure makes us unresponsive." Now, I want to tell you what happens when we forget. When we give up on the story and we practice amnesia, we give up on the wonder of abundance. We neglect God's miracle of generosity, and we start imagining that there is a scarcity of food, of love, of life. When we forget, we give up on the story. We forget the wonder of abundance, and we start imagining that there is scarcity. When we become consumed with the pursuit of wealth, we forget. We forget that our abundance comes from God, that it is through his generous provision that we receive all things. And as we forget that, we begin to develop a fear of scarcity. We begin pursuing our own self-interest, taking advantage of others if necessary, and turning a blind eye to the needs of those around us. But God calls us not to do that, because people matter to him. Over and over throughout the Bible, we see verses that talk about how much God cares for people and for those in need. A few verses. "There will always be poor in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. You evildoers frustrate the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. When the poor and needy search for water and there is none, and their tongues are parched from thirst, then I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will never abandon them." God cares for those in need and calls us to do likewise. But in order to do that, we need to truly experience grace. Because generosity is a byproduct of grace. Rick McKinley in his book, Faith for This Moment, that we've kind of been following through in this series, says, in small but significant ways, generosity is the powerful practice of breaking the vicious circle of self-interest, freeing us to see ourselves in the faces of our neighbors. In practicing generosity, we remember our own poverty before God and his gracious and abundant provision of mercy, which we didn't earn or work to obtain. Generosity is a revolution of grace. Once we have truly experienced the generous grace of God, we will graciously extend generosity to others. It's impossible, however, to have a deep understanding of grace and not give. Generosity follows grace. It's kind of like thunder and lightning. Thunder just naturally and automatically follows lightning. Thunder doesn't have to try harder to be thunder. It doesn't need to okay, next time there's lightning, I need to be on the ball and I need to respond quickly, faster. It is just a natural and automatic response to the lightning. And that's what generosity needs to be to grace. But it takes practice. Last week, Andy referred to the high school volleyball team that he was coaching in the fall. And if you haven't heard, if you weren't here last week, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to Andy's sermon online. But he talked about the young grade 7ers that were looking to play volleyball and had great aspirations for smashes and serves and digs. And in their head, they knew what they wanted to do. But they weren't always so keen on needing to practice it. But in order for them to come to be able to learn to do those things in a game setting, they needed to practice. They needed to go into training in order to learn to do those things. And generosity is not always our default response to a situation. We do need to train for it. It isn't always natural. I remember back early 20s, really new, getting involved in youth ministry in our church in Verdun. And I'd taken our youth group up to our cottage for a youth retreat for the weekend. And I invited my uncle Murray, to come up and be the speaker, to do some devotions with our group. And one night, we had talked, and we were having a great time playing games with everybody. And then it was kind of downtime and free time. And I guess I got distracted or something. Anyways, all the kids had left. And I realized that they were now all down at the beach swimming. And I had been very clear for them not to do that. So when I heard and saw that they were down there, my first response was not grace and understanding of the situation. I was ticked. I was mad. And I was ready to storm down there, and I was going to give them a piece of my mind, and I was going to tell them how everything they were doing was wrong and unacceptable, and how dare could they treat me that way. Ben Gagnon was one of the leaders of that, by the way, just for those that know Ben. And so I got ready to go over. My uncle was sitting there, and he said, you want me to come with you? I said, sure. So as we walked along the road, I just said, okay, I'll ask him what he would do, knowing that he was going to tell me, yeah, you got to lay down the law, you need to do this. And he simply spoke and talked about what do you really want to accomplish? What is important